Today's webinar is titled Service Animals and EMS, What Our Textbooks Don't Contain, presented by Rob Ravndal. I'm going to pass it over now to our presenter. Rob, thank you so much for being here with us today to share your knowledge and experience with us, and we look forward to the presentation.
Well, yes, thank you, Rio. I truly appreciate National EMS Educators Association giving me the opportunity to share this information. I also want to tell everybody that's participating, thank you for being here today. Um, the whole background of this was, I'll go into my career here in a moment, but I spent a whole career as a field provider and had no clue what a service animal was until I got one. So if I would have run a call with a patient with a service animal, I would have absolutely been that guy on somebody's TikTok doing absolutely the wrong thing and saying all of the wrong things simply because I had no clue as to what I didn't know. So anyway, I'll get started and uh, pardon me, old people and computer issues here. Here we go. So kind of a bit of an intro is this is about service animals and access rights. These is obviously it doesn't exist in our textbooks. There are a few bastions of EMS educators out there that are kind of teaching this, but they're very, very limited. And most of our students, if they have any service animal education when they come into our programs, it's because they brought that knowledge with them. They didn't get it from our program. As I said before, I had no clue until I got a service animal, what they were, where they could go, what their access rights were. And also kind of my background a bit is I spent roughly um, 17 years as a field provider, as a paramedic. I worked for Alachua County Fire Rescue in Gainesville, Florida. I also worked for Campbell County Memorial EMS in Wyoming. And in addition, I retired from Lincoln Fire and Rescue here in Lincoln, Nebraska in 2018. Um, it was kind of towards the end of my career that I got a service animal and I realized the disparity and I saw the contrast between how the world reacted to me prior to having a disability versus once I had a disability. And I said, holy cow, I can't believe this is happening. And really, most of it was the negative interactions were truly coming from a stance of, in most cases, ignorance. Um, Once I retired, started working in a college environment, I kind of got addicted to learning. And so I got a bachelor's degree in history simply because I enjoy history and I thought it'd be interesting. And in that, that really piqued my interest in civil rights history. And so I got a master's degree in history where my intention was to study civil rights, but I didn't get very far in studying history until I realized that you can't study American civil rights history without studying indigenous history because those two are just so closely interconnected. So most of my historical research and writings and studies have kind of centered around people that have been left out of the book, so to speak. Some of them are disenfranchised people. Other people are maybe not from disenfranchised group, but they're the history of the little guy, so to speak. And so somebody that wasn't opulent enough to be, that they weren't wealthy or they weren't famous like a George Washington or a Thomas Jefferson. So here's a bit about my career. As I kind of said before, I became a paramedic in 1993. So I've been around EMS for quite a while. And in 1991, I became an EMT. I was the senior in high school and taking the EMT class at the area VOTAC. I have an Associate of Applied Science degree in fire science and then also a bachelor's in history and a master's in history. I kind of have a pre-retirement photo. As well as everybody wants to see the dog. So I have a headshot with Carnes and I there. And Carnes is my very loyal service dog that's about as far away as he will allow himself to get from me. So he's an excellent dog. Kind of some fun facts. Before anything, before I'm a paramedic or an educator or a scholar, I'm a husband and a father. Um, Outside of my family, my passions are fishing and camping, and as you can see, Karn shares those passions too, as he's standing alongside me in a lake in Canada, eagerly awaiting the next catch. Um, in my free time, I like to do advocacy on disability rights and education on that, as well as advocacy and education on first responder mental health. I retired from the field in 2018 due to PTSD that I acquired from a single incident on the job. So big thing here is I'm very passionate, I'm very serious about this when I say please ask questions. Kind of my stickers up here, I love it, is PTSD is a normal reaction to extreme trauma, just as bleeding is a normal reaction to being stabbed. So um, I kind of like that because until I got it, I didn't know it was normal. And though that's not the topic of our conversation today, sometimes when I tell people that I have PTSD, sometimes just in their own compassion, they think they have to tiptoe around on eggshells. So when I say feel free to ask questions, you can ask any question that you like. If Carnes does jump up on me and you can see him in the camera, don't be alarmed. It's just that he's picked up on something and he's doing his task work. And then when he's done with his task work, we'll get back to the webinar. Okay, so the objectives of this is to know how the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, defines a service animal and what questions we can ask to determine if an animal is or is not a service animal. Secondly, we determine when and how EMS providers should and should not accommodate a service animal. And the third thing is, and this is going to be probably the easiest thing of the whole day, is how you can develop curriculum concerning service animal education and place it into what you're already doing and not have it be another just another stack of job responsibilities to put on your desk. Um, Surprisingly, the ADA is written in very simple, very simple language. It's not complicated, and they're very specific on how they define service animals. And they simply, sorry about that. Um, the ADA defines a service animal as being an animal that specifically it says a service animal is defined as dogs that are individually trained to do work or perform tasks for people with disabilities. Um, Generally, according to we fall under Title II and Title III, which are entities that must permit service animals to accompany people with disabilities in all areas where members of the public are allowed to go. Title II entities pertain, those are state government entities. And Title III would be businesses and nonprofits that provide services or are open to the public. So service animals, they're very they're very specific to the person that they're doing work and task for. So what that means is Carnes does my service dog Carnes, he does task work related to my PTSD. So he does blocking, which means that if someone starts to crowd me too much, he will stand between me and them and occupy space. So he makes sure I have my personal space. Also, if I'm, for instance, say I'm in a checkout line at the grocery store or whatever, he will block behind me, and he's not aggressive. He just occupies space so that nobody can sneak up on me or kind of really push up into my space, my personal space. He also does deep pressure therapy. So what that means is if he noticed that I were to get triggered or something was setting me off a little bit, Carnes will actually climb up in my lap, or if I'm standing, he'll get on his hind legs and put pressure on my chest and abdomen to try to stimulate my vagus nerve so that in essence, my brain might be saying, hey, let's have anxiety, but my body can't follow along with it. Now that's important because if I have, let's say, for example, let's say my wife had a disability and she's like, okay, I'm going to take your service dog today. And let's just say her disability is that she's deaf. right? Well, my dog isn't trained to perform tasks for her, so therefore it's not a service animal when it's with my wife, because the dog doesn't perform tasks for her. The same thing would be true that if I walk into let's say my wife is like, hey, I'm going to go to the grocery store. I want to take your service dog with me. For one, she would not do that. But for two, since she doesn't have a disability, it's not a service dog when it's not accompanied by me. So some examples of task, I gave you a couple of cards, but the big thing about task is, or task are, is that tasks have to be a physical action that the dog actually takes. It can't be that the presence of the dog provides comfort or stability. It has to be something that animal physically does. Some examples also are alerting, guarding during a seizure, guide work, etc. So this is something we need to be aware of, is there are things called 3-unit teams. And what this means is that the person with a disability is, maybe because of their age or even because of their disability, maybe they can't actually control the service dog at all times. And so they may have someone with them who is the handler, if you will. 3-unit teams have access in the same way that I do as a 2-unit team with Carnes and I. And generally, you're going to see this most commonly with small children, especially like you can see this particular setup in the picture here. This is very likely showing a child with would be my first guess would be it'd be a child with autism that might be a runner. And the dogs are amazing because that little kid can outrun their parents any day of the week, but he can't outrun the four-legged dog who will literally run them down and get in their way and stop them and refocus their energies. It's amazing to see them work. Um, but the dog still performs tasks for the person with the disability, and they are covered by the ADA. Also, too, I want to focus in on a lot of my talk today concerns the ADA. Some states and even municipal governments might have laws that are more stringent than the ADA, but obviously, since the ADA is federal law, no one can have a law um, that is less stringent or doesn't give access in the same way the ADA does. So here's the big one that I hear a lot is, well, how do we know that it's a service dog? So the first thing is service dogs are not required by the ADA to wear any kind of vest, cape, have any kind of identifying mark, leashes. They're not required to have any IDs or the cards or whatever. In general, the things like the vest, leashes, ID cards, so on and so forth, those can be purchased by anybody off of Amazon. And then really anybody with a laminator and a printer can make a card. So here's how the ADA says that you can determine if it's a service animal or not. And the ADA actually says when it's not readily apparent. So if we went back to the picture of the blind woman using the guide dog, we could say that that is an apparent, it's apparent what the dog does for her. But even still, you're never wrong to ask these questions. And these are the two questions that ADA permits us to ask. And I would recommend copying these verbatim and having your students have a little card or something with them on them. Use these verbatim. So we can say, is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? And what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? Those are the only two questions we can ask. Now, since we're teaching students a medical profession, and part of carrying out our critical functions of our medical profession are to ask, sample history, medical history, things like that, we can still ask those questions, but the patient doesn't have to tell us if they don't want to, um, why they have the service dog. So just be aware of that. Um, so you can't require medical documentation. You can't obviously the ID cards, all of that stuff is not legitimate. You can't ask for training documentation, and you can't ask for a demonstration for the dog to demonstrate its work or task. So why does it matter to ask the questions? Um, Here's the big one. The ADA pretty much, let's just use an example of, let's just use an ambulance service. Let's say that an ambulance service responds to a call and they have a patient that they've asked the two questions to. They've determined this is a service animal and they're going to transport the service animal with the handler or the whom is the or the, with the patient, right? So if that service animal bites one of the employees of the ambulance service or somehow causes any damage to person or property, the service dog handler is 100% liable for that. And the ADA places all of the liability for those types of things on the service animal handler, not on the entity that's permitting access. The other one is it matters to ask the questions because service animal handlers love it when entities ask us those two questions. And the reason is because we know that you know the law. And in essence, what the code is saying when those questions are asked, the code that is conveyed is you're not going to have any access issues with me because I know the law. It also is extremely respectful to ask the questions because um, it shows that your employer cared enough to actually train their staff properly. And it's quite truthfully the only people that get upset about the questions are the people that don't have legitimate service dogs. Um, so just a couple of key points. Service animals, dogs, and here's the caveat, sometimes miniature horses. So you can see here in this picture, this is an example of a miniature horse um, being used probably maybe as a service animal. Generally speaking, when you're going to see these, you're usually going to see these with people with mobility issues, and generally they're going to be larger statured people. So even though Carnes is 80-pound dog, um, if he were having to support, say, if I was 6'3" and 250 pounds and I had balance issues, even a Great Dane, that's really a lot of hard work for them to do day in and day out, and they're just not going to last very long. Miniature horse, I mean, they're horses, so they have a much that their bone structure permits that load much more frequently. Service animals are considered medical devices by the ADA. And as such, every time I if I buy a milk bone and give it to my dog, I keep the receipt and that's a tax deductible expense as a medical device. So pretty much in general, if you think about it, if you're like, okay, well, would I allow someone to bring a cane into this place, then into this area? Then if the answer is yes, then most of the time the answer is that they can also bring a service animal there too. Um, And emotional support animals and therapy dogs do not have access rights under the ADA. Um, and we'll get into more about the ESAs and the therapy animals in a minute, but have there been any questions come up, Rio?
Yes, we have one question here from Maria. Um,
Uh-huh.
can you speak to at all to navigating a student who requires the use of a service animal to include bringing them into clinicals slash on the truck? This was not an issue that I've personally had to navigate, but it was brought up as a scenario that happened in an instructor CE, and I didn't love the way it was said to have been managed.
Okay. Boy, yeah, that's a tough one. Um, that's a tough one. And here's why it gets to be a little bit of a sticky mire, is you're caught between an educational facility and the ADA, and you're caught between a clinical site slash employer and the ADA. So my talk today is really on the regards of from as a service provider, or if the student were the one providing service, how they should accommodate. And generally speaking, the ADA is more lenient, or it's more, how do I say this? If I call an ambulance right now from my office, the ADA views me and my service dog to be a temporary fixture within that ambulance service. So, meaning that because I'm a customer, I'm not permanent, and therefore they need to accommodate the dog unless there is a good reason not to. When it comes down to the why I say this gets sticky is with the clinical environment, is we're really starting to tap in a little bit into employment law with service animals and what is reasonable accommodation and employment. Even the student, though the student is not employed there, it could be argued that they are performing functions similar to enough to an employee that the clinical site has the right to have them enter the interactive process, which would be a process by which they would have to prove disability. Um, they would have to show they needed reasonable accommodation, and then that site then could offer other accommodations and whatnot. Um, that one's a mess. Just because it's not as clearly defined. But if you do have that come up, and I've had students with service animals, um, and I've always taken the approach that I've just talked to the student first, and I've said, "Hi, hey, what what is your envisionment of clinical for you? How do you see this happening?" And in my case, the cases that I've had, my students have said, I'm going to be fine at clinical without my service dog. I don't need my dog to go with me. And so we were, it just was a non-issue. Um, if that same issue came up, though, and understand, even though I will argue that my understanding of the ADA, specifically the service animals, is very robust, that is something that as a program director, I would still pick up the phone and contact my administration, who would get our college council involved. And this would be kind of a all hands on deck type scenario on how we would navigate it. So I apologize I did not answer your question more specifically, but it really is an answer that's going to say, well, every situation is going to be a little bit different. Are there any other questions at this time, Rio?
Yes. Well, Maria did say that that was helpful. Thank you. And Dawn says that I am a +4 allergic to dogs. How do I balance that if a dog goes to the library?
Ah, okay, we're about to get there. So that is great. Can she elaborate on what +4 is? Like, does that cause immediate life-threatening situation, or is it more on the lines of just a lot of symptoms of running, itchies, runny nose, breathing, stuff like. If you're comfortable defining clear, adding to that, that would help.
While we wait for that, there is one other question here.
Okay.
Should a transporting agency be taking any special considerations regarding securing the animal during transport?
Yes. And I should have put that a little further up, but in essence, what I would say is communicate with the service animal handler. However, this is something that really our research and development departments, or our ambulance manufacturers, this is where we can really use their engineers to kind of come to the rescue, so to speak, and design something. It's a legitimate concern, but if it would hold up under litigation, I that would be a rocky subject. If we said, okay, we can't take the dog because we can't secure the dog, um, that might be an uphill climb. But in the meantime, I would talk to the service animal handler and just communicate with them and say, hey, here's our concern. they're obviously going to be concerned about the dog's safety and ask what they would recommend or what they would have you do. I carry around a bag with me all the time. And you take a service dog somewhere, it's about like having to take a diaper bag for a 3 year old. And so, or actually a 2 year old. And so, I have a restraint for that purpose in my bag. That's not uncommon for handlers to have. But the other thing that could be done too is Carnes will lay on my legs on a cot if I ask him to, and you could just simply run the leg seat belt on the cot through his vest. So there are ways to work around it in the meantime.
All right. I don't see a follow-up to Dawn's question yet.
Okay, we'll get to allergies, and if that doesn't specify it, Don, please contribute. All right, so emotional support animals. So I don't know if you guys remember this, but it was around 2017 that somebody tried to take a peacock onto an airplane. To be honest with you, emotional support animals, they serve a purpose. They help a lot of people. From a service animal handler perspective, Carnes and I we do not utilize, um, well, to put it bluntly, when airplanes allowed emotional support animals on airplanes, Carnes and I did not fly. If I was going from Lincoln, Nebraska to Miami, Florida, we would drive. And the reason we didn't fly is because of there's no training requirements of the ESAs, and there were headlines all over the place about emotional support animal attack service dog. And quite truthfully, I just can't risk losing my service dog because of that. So, but they do perform a vital component. They do help people, but they provide comfort or emotional support through their presence. They don't have access rights to public buildings and businesses, um, and unless the local government says that they do. But think of an ESA as an animal that's a buddy to a person with a disability. They don't actually do work though that mitigates the disability outright. Therapy dogs are another wonderful tool. And as you can see here in the picture, like this showing a hospital that uses them. Very common in hospitals, schools, nursing homes, even on our college campus. Exam weeks, they bring therapy dogs in, and really they're a great. Like I'm all for. I think they're great. I really do. However, they or think of them as everybody's buddy and who doesn't like them, but they don't have access rights under the ADA because they do not mitigate a disability for a person. They are just simply a, a nice feature or comfort or what have you. So a business can say therapy dog cannot enter. Henceforth, if the ambulance service came to our college on, say, therapy dog day, and the therapy dog handler was having a medical emergency, it might be good customer service to help them find arrangements for their therapy dog, but there's no law compelling the ambulance service to transport the therapy dog with the patient. So access and why does it matter? So here's the here's the simplest term. Access is about who has the right to move freely through society and enjoy the American experience in the same way as everyone else. That's what access is all about. Access for service animals obviously is granted by the law. Denying access to a service animal without probable cause, which we'll get into in a moment, is discrimination. And yeah, so it's pretty clear cut. I really like to, in another presentation I do, I dive into the to civil rights history, disability rights history, and it really kind of helps to bridge the gap because if I ask the question of an audience and I say, okay, what do you guys think about if I want to bring a service dog into a hospital? There obviously generally speaking, the room will be somewhat divided, and that there's some that are like, well, I don't know, it's a hospital, it's a medical facility, there's sick people there, and other ones, the other side's like, oh yeah, it's fine. But if I have let's say I have a lunch counter, and on one end of the lunch counter, I say this is where these people can sit, and on the other end of the lunch counter, I say, well, that's where these people can sit. They're like, no, 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 that's not okay. In essence, when it comes to service animal access, really in fundamentally the same thing as the lunch counter. Um, so when can access be denied? So if the dog is out of control and the handler does not take effective action to control it. So examples of that could be barking, lunging. Now, I will say, preface this, when Carnes alerts and many service dogs, when they alert, they may bark, and that's it. That's part of their task. But if they're, growling, snarling, snipping, showing any signs of aggression, that's a no-go. Um, if the dog is not housebroken, so it's not okay for Carnes, no. So that would be an example of a dog barking and a handler getting control. I don't know. Could you guys hear the barking, Rio?
Yeah, I heard a little woof.
Okay, yeah. So, um, yeah, we had a dolly come by my office, and we don't usually see those. So anyway, but he's not barking now, so that would be an example of a dog barking and the handler taking control of it. Um, Generally, service animals have access to hospitals. However, in the ADA and the Department of Justice interpretations of the ADA guidances that they put out, it's absolutely accepted that operating rooms and burn units are sterile environments. They are absolutely, like, the hospital has every right to say no service animals in the operating room, no service animals in the burn unit. Um, so here's an example of an aggressive dog. Obviously, you don't have to tolerate this, like service dog or not. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be subjected to it. However, when the ADA uses the term of a dog posing a direct threat, and what it means is that the dog is actually threatening the safety of someone at this point in time. It does not mean that, say, for example, if my dog might show aggression. It's got to be that it actually has done it. Um, so allergies and fear of dogs. So this is why I asked. Now, generally speaking, well, in all cases, fear of dogs is not recognized by the ADA as being acceptable reason to bar access to a service animal. Allergies are also largely considered not a reason to bar access to a service animal. Now, let's just say, for example, that I'm going into the hospital, right? And I'm going to be a patient there. Or even if I'm going into the hospital to see a relative, whatever the case might be. Um, the hospital, let's just say, for example, that there's a patient that is in the same room as me, right? That has an allergy to dogs that is life threatening. And that part of the reason dogs are used is because of their stature, their ability to be trained, just their inherent desire to work, but also because allergies to dogs are less common than, say, allergies to cats. Um, if the person's allergies would be such that it causes them undue risk or undue harm, then in that case, the expectation would be, as if that I'm a patient of the hospital or even visiting as a person, no, say a patient, the expectation would be the ADA would say, hey, your hospital is a really big place. Can you just put the service dog in one place, in one place and the person with the allergy in another place. And that's generally how those are mitigated. Um, if it's something that, um, say for example, I'm on a floor and um, and that floor is for respiratory issues, and the dog's presence actually poses a detriment because of the dog being there, to an actual detriment to the other people in the facility, then they could keep me out of that area. But it would also be generally expected that if I were the patient and I were not affected by my dog, that the hospital would find another location where I could be treated just like everybody else. Um, the also too, the ADA does not require hospitals, ambulance services, or any other entity to provide care for a service dog while it's there. So if I were the patient and I was let's say I broke my leg and it's like, oh boy, yeah, that femur's sticking out of your leg. You're going to go to surgery today. Um, the ambulance service would still need to transport me with my service dog as long as I'm in control of my service dog. And they can't say, well, you're going to go to surgery, so therefore we're not going to take the dog. The expectation would be that I know I can't take the service dog into the operating room, and so the ADA places it on me that I would have another means to have my dog cared for, whether that be I called a relative or family member or whatever to come and get the dog, then that would be fine. And the same thing if I were admitted and I couldn't go out and walk my dog and I couldn't feed my dog, I can still have my dog there, but I would need to have arrangements so that hospital staff are not the ones having to actually provide food, water, and potty breaks to my dog. The lady with allergies, did we answer your question?
Yeah, so Dawn did say that, let me pull it back up here. 4 was like the highest severe allergy.
Okay.
Um,
And generally speaking, if you were an employee, let's say you were an employee of an ambulance service and you had that severity of an allergy, then you'd probably want to have a reasonable accommodation on file with your employer. Um, because generally speaking, the ADA would kind of say, okay, well, the employer should have something worked out in advance. So, say you were the paramedic that responded to me. If my service dog causes you life threats, the employer should have something else worked out. So I still receive service with my service animal, and you still um, are protected and not subjected to something that's going to be detrimental to you. Um, So here's some examples about to transport the dog or not to transport the dog. The big thing is the handler unconscious? So if I were in cardiac arrest in the public park, and let's say it's apparent my dog's a service dog, he's wearing his vest, he's well behaved, Carnes more than likely would be laying right on top of me because he'd be like, oh, something's wrong. I need to, try deep pressure therapy to mitigate this. Um, the issue becomes, do we take the dog or do we not? Well, at that moment in time, I'm unconscious, I'm in cardiac arrest, I have actual life threats happening right now, not potential life threats, but actual ones. And so, therefore, take care of the human first. Good customer service would say that you wouldn't just leave the dog on the scene, that if you can't transport the dog with the unconscious handler or whatever, have a police officer, have whether it's an EMS supervisor, a firefighter, some other responsible party take custody of the dog, and then they could either work to find a family member or to have the dog, to take the dog to the local humane society for temporary shelter, vet's office, something like that. Um, if it's in public versus private space, so like if it was in my home, then obviously, and I'm in a life-threatening situation, I can't handle my dog, then you don't necessarily have to take the dog, but it would be really like you would get a gold star for customer service if you contact, let's say if I were living alone, it's apparent I live alone, you're like, boy, I think he's going to be in the hospital a while. Definitely report to the hospital staff, hey, there's a service dog back at that house and it doesn't look like anybody's going to be there. Can you guys help this patient to find somebody to care for their dog while they're in the hospital. And obviously, if I'm having a life-threatening issue, absolutely you don't have to alter the fundamental aspects of our job and what our service is, which is to provide treatment and transport to people with life threats. So if the ambulance, even if I can control my dog, if I need five providers to take care of me adequately, then that would be a reason that maybe if we can't accommodate the dog this time, that would kind of be a reason. Um, but if it's a case where I don't really need the five providers, but maybe like happens in some of our rural communities here, maybe they respond with five providers in the back of the ambulance, but they only need two of them to actually take care of me, not transporting the service dog. So the other providers that aren't needed have a ride would that would be kind of a shaky argument to not transport a service dog. As the ADA would say, well, those people don't have a disability, so other transport arrangements could be made for those additional staff members. Um, Big one here. So if a hospital or emergency department denies access, what do we do? Um, the first thing I want to say is I've got this on a later slide, but it's more appropriate to place it here, and I'll move my slides for the future, Rio. But understand something to understand is we always think about, okay, well, how common are service animal access issues? And because of my students, I don't mind telling you some of mine. I have been, when I've been denied access, and I've been with the service animal since 2018, actually 2017. I've only been denied access twice to a private business. And in both of those times, I was able to just say to the manager, um, "Hey, uh, go look this up online before you go any farther. Here's the website. Go to ada.gov, type in service animal, and read that. And then after you read that, I'd be happy to talk to you. Like I'm like, but please do this before you do anything else." And they go and look, and they always came back and they're like, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." The other times that I have been denied access or had issues or been harassed by police or what have you have always come from healthcare facilities and public entities. So, public entities meaning like a city owned beach that has a no dogs policy, or a public transportation like a city bus, um, or obviously healthcare facilities like surgery centers, hospitals, whatever. Ironically, in my experience, I've had fewer access issues in rural counties. And here in Nebraska, we have some very rural counties. In counties of 300 people, I go to their hospital. I've never had an issue. The issue has always been in the major cities for some reason. So these things happen. They're unfortunately common, and that's why I'm doing this today, because a lot of these things happen because we just haven't trained anybody. We haven't educated them on the right thing to do is. So if this happens, and this is what I instruct my students, the first thing is stay calm. Like there's no reason for shouting matches, no reason to be upset. Your patient is watching. They know, and believe me, as a patient with a service animal, if the hospital is raising a stink about my service dog, to be honest, I really don't want to be there. Like nobody enjoys being discriminated against. Um, First thing to do is to just educate the staff. Second thing they should do is contact their immediate supervisor. And this is a big one that sometimes people don't really want to get into because of, interagency issues or concerns or relationships. But absolutely uh, document this really well. And the service really should, if this is a true denial of access to a hospital, absolutely file a complaint with Health and Human Services, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, as well as look into EMTALA and see and file EMTALA complaints. that is like those have to happen, and they have to happen not to punish people, but that ensures that we change our industry and people get educated properly. Consider transport to another facility and write a really good report, whether it's an incident report or in the patient care narrative, probably more appropriate in an incident report, but there should be names, dates, times, the whole 9 yards. Um, don't offer arrangements for the service dogs. Don't offer to take the dog to a vet, a shelter, um, a rescue, whatever, because all that's doing is placating discrimination. You're enabling it rather than saying, okay, well, this has to stop. Um, so what about the fakes? So Rio and I were talking about this a little bit. Hey, the people that want to take their dog to Walmart, whatever. So some states have penalties for faking a service animal, and service animal handlers love those. Um, in all states, if the dog's out of control, it can be removed. And the people with the fake service animals, in most cases, will not know how to answer the two questions the ADA allows. They'll also usually say, you can't ask me that, da, 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 da. And even though you've seen me on the webinar, you have every reason to believe that me and my dog Carnes, that he's a service dog. If you ask me the questions and I tell you, well, you can't ask me that, da, 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 you have every right to deny me access. And that's perfectly legal. Um, here's just a little outline, but the 9 times have been denied access. Only one has been a religious organization, and they can do it because of the separations of church and state within the Constitution. The ADA does not apply to religious organizations. Membership organizations also have rights that they don't have to permit service animals. But the rest of them, the most of them have been from public service entities and or municipal governments as well as healthcare facilities. Um, Something that we need to educate our students about a little bit are some of the pitfalls, and that is that as I've done my research and reviewed and spoken with service animal handlers that have had issues with EMS and EMS provide the whole 9 yards. The common thread that comes up is that the EMS provider, healthcare worker that's denying access sees a dog. The person that has the disability that uses a service animal sees mobility through society. They see freedom. And those two, even though they're speaking the same English language, they're not communicating on the same wavelength because this person over here with the service dog is saying, but you have to give me access. And the person over here that's denying access is saying, but I see a dog, and dogs don't belong in hospitals. They don't belong in restaurants. They don't belong in whatever the case is, right? And so really what we have here is we have on our end of EMS providers in general and healthcare in general is we have a lack of education of our people. Um, and that's leading us that we see a dog instead of we see a person that has a medical device. And so really that's what this all is really all about. Um, and my objective is to advocate for the patients as well as for our providers because I don't expect a paramedic student to go out and intubate someone in the field without being educated on how to do it. Yet I don't allow an EMT student to go administer oxygen without being educated on how to do it. Yet when it comes to service animals, these have the potential to be high profile, high liability, um, public relations disasters, and we just don't educate our providers on it. And in that way, as an entire healthcare system, we're not advocating for our patients, and nor are we advocating for our providers either. We're putting everybody in a really horrible spot, and then maybe administrations get upset when it goes wrong. But like, what else would we expect to have happen? Um, Power of one. JFK said one person can make a difference, and everybody should try. So don't be afraid to ask the two questions. It does show that you care. Don't make a policy that all dogs can ride in the ambulance. It's actually very disrespectful to people that do have legitimate service dogs. And what it shows is it shows systematic laziness and saying, well, instead of taking a few minutes to train our people, we're just going to let everybody bring their dog, and that's kind of the easy way out. Now, curriculum development. Here's the beauty of this. People with service animals have heart attacks, they have seizures, they have hypoglycemia, they get in car wrecks, they break their leg, they get lacerations, they get the same medical and traumatic um, pathologies as everybody else in society. So instead of making a service animal segment, you can incorporate it in what you're already doing. And here's your easiest way to do it. For one, get educated on the ADA a little bit. You go to ada.gov, type in service animals. You'll get like a two-page document, very easily read. It's a great document. That's going to help you give you a framework. Reach out to service animal trainers and organizations are going to be more than happy to help you. Um, Having service animals incorporated, so these service dog trainers and organizations would probably be tickled pink to bring service animals or even those in training to your lab. Let your students run scenarios. It's great training for the dogs. It's great for the students. These are times where like you could take pictures. I mean, your school could really go all out on this. And it's really one of those, it looks good in the press. It's a feel good thing. And it tells the service animal community around you, like, holy cow, these people get it. They're trying to be proactive here and do something. So there's really not many setbacks. It's only rewards. Um, but how do you find these? So just Google them. Another way, if you're living in a smaller area, maybe you look up service animal organizations, you don't find any near you, whatever. You can, I've got it on the next slide. So you can look for service dog accreditation agencies. They're a good contact point. Assistance Dogs International, the National Disability Rights Network, they have representatives in every state. And a lot of the like the Disability Rights Network here in Nebraska, they have me on file as somebody that has said, hey, I'm happy for people to reach out to me and talk to me about service dog issues or concerns or whatnot. Um, so they're going to know who has service animals. They're also going to probably have contacts with trainers and all kinds of people. They'll be very happy to help you, and all of this is free. Animal shelters, surprisingly, usually have dog trainers that are either on staff or frequent their facility. They'll more than likely get you in contact with their trainer. Their trainers will know who service. They'll have a network of service dog trainers because the purpose of dog trainers going to animal shelters is they're surveying the dogs, they're weighing them out to help them in positive placements in homes, but they're also looking for, hey, which ones here might be, which one is the 1 in 100,000 that could be a service animal, and they know who to call when they have those. Um, yeah, so those are real simple, easy ways to do it. Your advisory committees are also going to be good, helpful tools. But I'm open to questions, comments, and also too on the last slide, I have my contact information here. Here's my references, but here's my contact. Email is the best way to get me. If you lose my email, Rio, you're more than happy. If anybody emails you, you can always share my information with them.
Perfect. I will be sure to include that in tomorrow's follow-up email. Does anybody have any other questions they would like to submit at this time? Okay. Well,
I'm
Rob,
going to give it,
oh, go ahead,
hold on,
sorry.
I'm going to give a shout out to Valentine, Nebraska. My father-in-law lives in Hyannis, and Valentine, Nebraska is his county seat. So You're actually on you're on a national webinar, and the people on the webinar know where Valentine is.
Hmm. All right, I don't see any other questions here. Rob, thank you so much for presenting on such an important topic. I hope that we can present this webinar again in the future for everybody to attend, get the word out about it.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. And everybody that attended today, thank you so much. I did put the link in the chat to obtain your CE, but if you missed that, it will also be in tomorrow's follow-up email, along with Rob's email address and a link to this recording. So with that, I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of your day, and thank you again, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.